Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. Well, folks, we're back home, and for the most part, it's business as usual. We returned on Friday, and by the weekend's end, the temperatures had dropped. We got a sprinkle of rain, and much of the line fire was contained. Now, sadly, we lost a 99-year-old fire tower that Sarah and I frequented, and one home was lost in the Running Springs area, which is 5 or 6 miles to the east as the crow flies from our place here in Lake Arrowhead. Now, as tragic as it was to lose that one house, there were some 36,000 at risk, including our own. So only having lost one is a bit of a miracle. Now, I just want to take a hot minute to thank all the firefighters, the pilots, the law enforcement, volunteers, and anyone else that helped to save our community. Your bravery neither goes unnoticed nor unappreciated. Simply put, we owe those brave men and women everything. Now, as far as the Monsters Among Us schedule is concerned, as you can imagine, I'm pretty far behind, having taken an unplanned week off while we were evacuated. But the good news is that I was able to work here and there, and thankfully Delaney has been picking up much of my slack. So although this episode is another Patreon unlock, next week we will return to our normal schedule, and we will release the long-awaited Season 17 finale, your latest Hometown Legends episode. I'm currently working hard on that as we speak. So in the meantime, enjoy these two after-show unlocks, Season 17 Episode 4's Beyond portion, and Season 17 Episode 7's Beyond portion, already in progress. Now, I will be back, of course, on Tuesday with something brand new and haunting for you to enjoy. So don't forget to join us there. Otherwise, enjoy the unlocked episodes, and I will see you all very soon. And we also share never-before-heard calls, like this one, from an anonymous caller out of the Golden State of California.
Hi, I'd like to remain anonymous, but I am someone who's seen stuff since I was very small. I've been all over the world, seen all sorts of interesting things, but I wanted to call about the shadow people request you sent out of people who have made contact with shadow people. I have. It wasn't really a choice, but I was on San Francisco BART. I'm mostly from the Bay Area, and I have seen many types of shadow people. Most of them are just voids that are in the silhouette of a human being. This one was different. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're tall, sometimes they're short, but they're always a void, just a dark blackest of black. And I was sitting on BART train. This is about 2 years ago, maybe longer actually, maybe 5. It was spring, summer, beautiful sunny day, nothing heebie-jeebie going on except for that BART is sometimes kind of creepy depending on your company, because it is public transit, just in case you don't know what it is. But as I was sitting there enjoying the sun and enjoying kind of the people watching and the scenery flashing by outside the city, I felt kind of this coldness this feeling I associate when I'm about to have a sighting. Happens to me a lot, so I'm pretty used to it. And I turned because I knew it was right next to me. The seat next to me was empty by the window. Not really sure why I left it empty. Usually I sit by the window, but that day I did. And there was a shadow person that was much taller than me. But the difference about this shadow person was it actually had some sort of veil covering it. So you saw the silhouette, but then you also saw this beautiful veil. And the veil was almost made of cosmos or stars. I'm not really sure how to describe it, honestly, but just imagine a shadow with a veil that was see-through so you could see the body, and then that veil itself was kind of a rippling gray mixed with stars and little twinkling lights and almost like space kind of constellations. It was really quite beautiful. And the feeling it gave to me that it had never been human and never was human, but I'm not by any means a psychic or anything like that. Anyways, it reached out to me, and I could hear like a soft murmuring. Couldn't distinguish what it was saying, and I didn't feel completely comfortable. But for some reason, I put my hand out, and I've never actually communicated with what I see before. I try not to because I feel like it might encourage the behavior, but I just put my hand out. I couldn't help it, and it very slightly touched its hand to my hand, like the softest touch you could imagine. And in that moment, there was this just static electricity. It didn't feel like bad. It didn't feel like good. It felt more just like straight Mother Nature, something primal. I took my hand away very quickly because the feeling was really overwhelming. And what was weird is that usually things will disappear quite quickly. But after I took my hand away, I expected this being to kind of dissipate or leave. And it didn't. It didn't have a face, but it didn't try to touch me anymore, but it kind of sat there. And the feeling I got from it was that it was like disappointed or hurt that I wasn't more comfortable communicating with it. It almost seemed like it was excited that I saw it. And as we sat there next to each other, because it was a good 30-second interaction, maybe a minute, it slowly just faded away. But there was nothing aggressive about it. It was almost seeking or wanting to communicate. And I've always felt bad that I didn't know what to do at that time because I was so taken aback that it acknowledged me and touched me. Anyways, I wanted to share it because it was such a unique experience, and I knew you were looking for people who had spoken to a shadow person, and I think that was a shadow person. But honestly, it was different than anything I'd ever seen, and I wondered if anyone else has ever seen anything like it. I love your show. Gets me through some of the worst days, and I really appreciate you doing what you do. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, caller. Okay, I stand corrected. I remember a few years back making the claim that I'd never heard of a shadow person communicating with its victim. And I guess I was wrong with that assumption, because this is not the only entry I've received refuting that claim. And something tells me it's not the last either. Now, it's good to know that this entity felt harmless to you, caller, because every other aspect of this story is terrifying. It's interesting that you put a positive spin on it. And anyone know anything about the strange veil that she described? That's a new detail I hadn't heard in past Shadow Man entries. But something about it sounds awfully familiar. Well, either way, thank you for taking the time to share your story with us, caller. And please be sure to let us know if it ever comes back. Fall is my favorite time of year, and if you're like me, you have plans to hike in the crisp fall air. Check out the leaves and watch plenty of football. Fuel up for those action-packed days with Factor's no prep and no mess, chef-crafted meals. They make sure no matter how busy I am, I always have time for nutritious, great-tasting meals. With 35 different dietitian-approved meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, I'm never bored. I'm eating healthier and avoiding expensive takeout. One of these add-ons I found myself consistently ordering is the cold-pressed juice variety pack. The apple beet ginger juice is my new favorite. Now Factor has restaurant-quality meals with premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon, and I don't even have to make a big mess in the kitchen to enjoy these great flavors. Now Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes, and they come straight to my door. No shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleaning up required. Now you can choose from 6 menu preferences, like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Vegan and Veggie. And they're perfectly portioned, which makes meeting your health goals so much easier. Head to factormeals.com/MAU50 and use code MAU50 to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month. That's code MAU50 at factormeals.com/MAU50 to get 50% off your first box, plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Well, welcome back, squad. It's a damn pleasure to have you here with me this evening. I have a fun little after show slated for tonight. I think you're really going to enjoy it. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to stop chewing the fat and hit play on this next entry. A rebuttal of sorts. Nah, more like a confirmation. But first, I think I have to replay a call for you, so this all makes some sense. So from Season 16, Episode 9, please welcome back this anonymous caller from the Minnesota-Wisconsin border.
Hi, Derek and Monsters Among Us fans. I'm calling in from the Wisconsin-Minnesota border, and my story actually takes place in Minnesota. It actually happened earlier this evening. I was driving home from work, and I drive through an area of the country where there's a lot of bluffs, there's not a lot of flat ground, and I actually drive right down past the Mississippi River. And as I was driving home, I typically drive through a town, so there's usually a lot of lights and things like that. And I noticed up in the sky there were 2 dots of light. And at first I kind of thought they were, stars, but they didn't have the same light refraction that stars normally do. Normally for me, stars are usually pretty compact. They don't have a lot of light flare like headlights or street lamps do. And so I thought that was kind of odd. And then as I kind of got closer, I noticed that they were a lot closer than stars should be. Now, like I said, this is an area that has a lot of bluffs, and the road that I was on goes kind of underneath one of the bluffs, and a lot of times the houses up there, you can kind of see some of the lights, but this definitely wasn't that. It was out over the roadway, out in open air, and I noticed as I was looking at it that it actually had kind of a weird outline behind it, like it was something invisible or trying to pretend to be sky, and it wasn't quite getting it from the angle that I was at, but the closer I got, the more it seemed to match the sky. And I thought that was a little bit odd. It kind of looked like if you were standing under it and looking straight up, you wouldn't be able to see the outline, but at a distance and from an angle, you kind of could. And the other strange thing is that these were perfectly stationary. It wasn't moving like it was a low-flying plane. I actually drive really close to the airport right past it. And originally I thought it might be, a plane or a helicopter, but it was sitting still and there was nothing else on it. So I don't know what it was. I thought it was kind of weird. Maybe you or the rest of the Monsters Among Us fans have an idea of what it might be, but for right now, it's some sort of UAP. Thanks, Derek. Bye.
And we thank that caller once again. Now, to make all of this make sense, please welcome Sean from Wisconsin.
Hi, Derek. This is Sean from Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Hey, I was listening to the episode yesterday, and the lady from the Wisconsin-Minnesota border story, I saw that same exact thing in Oostburg on Highway 43, traveling north at mile marker 115. And I was looking out my windshield, and I saw, it almost looked like from the Harry Potter movie, where he puts the cloak on and you can sort of see that they disappear. You can sort of see the glimmery thing, like a mirror or a see-through. And I saw it in the sky, and it almost looked like the Gravitron spaceship from like the fair shape. And I was watching it through the windshield for about 5 seconds. I moved past the pillar on the passenger side of my truck and looked out the driver's side window, and it was gone. It's like it was transitioning from you could see it to not see it, like a glimmery like outline, and you could see the clouds through it like it was a reflection, or like a see-through, like a mirror window, and it was gone. And it wasn't very far away, maybe a quarter mile above me, maybe 500 yards up off the ground, and it was heading off Lake Michigan to the west. All right, well, that's my story, and I saw what the lady saw, I think, too. Thanks for all you do.
Thanks, Sean. Well, that sounds familiar. Not only does it sound like the previous caller's description, but it also sounds eerily similar to what Andrea described in her call that opened tonight's show. Some sort of cloaked craft cruising through the sky. Now, I'm afraid that drawing parallels is about as far as I can take these stories. Like I said in tonight's opener, this is starting to feel like a military thing more than it does a paranormal one. But that doesn't make it any less spooky. So we thank you both for your entries. And we thank you for keeping your eyes on the skies. Now, folks, don't forget, if you have an entry, call our hotline at 888-608-NIGHT or shoot me an email at monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com.
Now, obviously, yes or no questions are
at 8.9 million. Now, they cannot guarantee the outcome. Really, the play and a lot of talent already.
Another way is by keeping the calls rolling. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. By playing this entry from Aaron, all the way down in Australia.
Hello, Derek. My name is Erin, and I'm calling from Australia, if you could not tell by my accent. So, I do actually have a story about a Min light, and this is the first time I ever witnessed a Min light. And mind you, this did happen back in 2016 now, so it's been quite a few years, but this is my first ever, what I believe to be a Min light experience. So basically, at the time, I was living in Canberra, and in Canberra, obviously being a city, we have horse agistment places in and on the outskirts of Canberra where you can essentially rent or lease a paddock to keep a horse. Anyways, I was renting a paddock on the outskirts of Canberra. We were living in an area of Canberra called Western Creek, and there's quite a few agistment places around here. As it is the edge of Canberra, there's sort of not really any suburbs or anything beyond that Western Creek, that suburb. There's only mountains and, mountain ranges called the Brindabellas and, farmland and stuff like that. So there's basically nothing beyond this. So I was out one night checking my horse because she was due to go into foal and have a foal. So I was doing night checks quite frequently for that week or two before she gave birth and was constantly out at random hours of the night. I can honestly say I don't remember the time that this did actually happen, but it definitely would have been between probably 12 and 3 a.m., something like that. It was late. So there's not many people around at that time. Even though I am in a city, at this particular horse agistment place, it's kind of you sort of drive into a rural area and you can't really see the city or anything from where you are. You can sort of just see the light pollution in the direction of the city, but you can't sort of see it from where you are when you're there. And so anyways, I pulled up and it was an extremely windy night. Very, very windy. Weather warnings, massive wind gusts, the type of night where you'd expect to be seeing like trees and things falling down and stuff. You know, like you're getting warned by the news not to park under trees and things like that. So it's like that kind of weather night. Very windy. I pull up to the paddock and I just sort of feel weird when I get there because, mind you, it is pitch black here. There's no street lights. There are no lights because you're sort of just driving, you know, into a rural area about 10 minutes sort of out of the city. And yeah, so there's nothing there. So I drive in and I've never felt this before because, you know, sort of going to that place, being, you know, my horse paddock and stuff, it's always been like my sanctuary. It always feel good going there. I never feel like, you know, weird. But yeah, as I was driving in, I kind of just felt a little bit uneasy, like I almost just sort of didn't really want to be there at the time. But that sort of was unlike me because, you know, I had the joys of this fall coming. So normally each time I was quite excited going out there because I was sort of waiting for the signs of the birth. So as I kind of pull up to my paddock, because you got to sort of drive in pretty slow too, mind you, because there are dirt roads and the roads aren't in the best condition. So you're going fairly slow. And I pull up to my horse paddock and my horse was pretty good too. She would always come up to the car once I, you know, come up to the gate where the car was, like once I'd sort of pull up. So I was sort of just sitting in the car waiting for her to show up. And as I was sitting there, I noticed some lights that were they were to my left, and imagine like the city was to my right. So the way that my car was parked, like, you know, civilization's to my right, in front of me is like, you know, just like these horse paddocks. And then to my left is where these like Brindabella mountain ranges are and stuff. So there's like nothing but like fire trails and like just massive hills with trees and bushland and all that kind of stuff like in this area. There's nothing there. So I see these lights and they just literally appear to look like just a car, like low beam headlight sort of colour, or, you know, like the colour of a bright fire in the distance, that kind of like amber glow sort of colour. But these particular lights were as if, imagine you had like a cotton bud or like, you know, a broomstick or whatever, and there was a light at each end of that like pole, and it was slowly spinning and going down, but you couldn't see a pole in the middle. It was just like literally two lights, but spinning in that kind of direction. I do remember they were going clockwise. And yeah, and anyways, I was just watching these lights and just literally immediately, yeah, was just really, really scared. When I saw the lights, I think I was getting out of the car. So I was like half standing in, you know, one leg in the car, one leg out, sort of looking over the roof of my car to my left, watching these lights. And yeah, I was so scared. My horse came up to the gate. I looked at her, saw she was fine. By this point, the lights had pretty much gone below the tree line, so I couldn't see them anymore. They'd kind of disappeared by this point. And yeah, I just was so scared. I didn't even want to get out of my car. I just got straight back in the car and drove home. I actually didn't end up doing another night check that night either, just because of how much that kind of freaked me out. So yeah, and in Australia, I guess like when we see lights like that, I presumably say I saw a Min-Min light. I don't necessarily think it was a UFO. It kind of more or less had the Min-Min sort of properties to it, especially because it was like quite like low to the ground. It was quite close, completely silent, and yeah, just very scary. So yeah, thanks so much for the podcast. I love listening to it, always listening to it on long car trips. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Hope you can use this story. Thanks.
Thank you, Erin. Now let's start with a little background information, because I imagine there might be a few of you out there that are unfamiliar with the phenomena known as the Min-Min lights. Essentially, the Min lights are a fascinating and eerie phenomena that has intrigued residents and visitors of the Australian outback for generations. These mysterious lights appear as shimmering orbs that hover over the ground, often described as ghostly in nature. Witnesses report seeing them in remote areas, especially during the night, where they sometimes follow vehicles for miles before abruptly vanishing into the darkness. Now, despite numerous accounts and speculation, the true origin of the Min lights remains elusive. But while some attribute them to natural causes such as bioluminescence or atmospheric conditions, others entertain more fantastical theories, including paranormal or extraterrestrial explanations. Now, regardless of their source, the Min lights continue to spark curiosity and wonder, adding an element of mystique to the vast and desolate landscape of the outback. And I admittedly don't know much about the Min lights myself, but I do know my way around a ghost light or two. In fact, we investigated the phenomena for a few days when we shot our film, Shadows in the Desert. And go see it if you haven't already. But there, we suspected that large deposits of quartz under the ground could have produced these lights via a piezoelectric charge. And coincidentally, some of the research that Delaney pulled up for Aiden's call about the train encounter too discussed quartz and piezoelectricity as a possible cause of the Gurdon light. And the clip she found was too good not to share, so I'm happy that it found a home here. Now here is that clip, courtesy of PBS.
I like the ghost story aspect of this, because everybody that we talk to seem to think that it's a spirit, but there are also some other theories that we have, because here in Arkansas we have some of the largest quartz deposits in the entire world, and there's an interesting principle called piezoelectricity. So when anything with a crystalline structure, when it's placed under pressure and it flexes, that crystal lattice will actually generate a high voltage electricity. We actually have a major fault line that runs through Arkansas known as the New Madrid Fault. And right here we are in Clark County, right on the edge of the fault line. This red dot here is a swarm of earthquakes that have been registered by the United States Geological Survey. So as the plates rub against each other, these quartz crystals start generating huge amounts of electricity. And I believe that this electricity could actually ionize the air above the fault line, generating these lights.
Now, what makes this particularly peculiar is that the subject area of our documentary, the Anza Borrego Desert State Park, also has serious earthquake issues. And as I said, plenty of quartz as well. And to tie all this together, you know who else has their fair share of both quartz and earthquakes? You guessed it, the area in and around Canberra, Australia. The location where Erin had her experience. So maybe there is something to this theory after all. Now, who has some free time on their hands and wants to compare known ghost light locations with geological maps and seismograph readouts? I'm telling you, there's a book to be written there. And thank you, Erin, for not only the long-distance entry, but allowing me to connect a few dots and light a couple fires. No pun intended. Now, folks, that's going to do it for this evening. A big thanks for all the support. A big thanks for hanging out with us this evening. And a huge thanks for keeping it spooky. Have a good night. What are you still doing here? Well, you looking for a secret entry? I guess it's been a while. And since I made a big stink about those particular calls in the main show, I suppose I do owe you guys one. Vince in Missouri. You think you can help us out?
Hi, my name is Vince. I live in St. Charles, Missouri. about an hour out of St. Louis. I was calling in about season 12, episode 6. You had talked about a cabot. I wanted to call in and tell you when I was a kid, we went to the pound to get a dog, but we were looking at all the other animals there too, and came across a really friendly calico-colored adult-size cat, and the back end looked just like rabbit legs, even had a fluffy tail, and it looked like you'd put a cat and a rabbit together. But from what I've been told by college friends of mine, that's not genetically possible. But anyway, the people at the pound said it was just a birth defect, but thought I'd just call in and let you know other people have seen that too. Thanks. Enjoy your show.
Thank you, Vince. Yet another cabot. Now Vince is referring to a story I told about my cousins that swore up and down that they saw a real-life cabot, a half-cat, half-rabbit creature, just as Vince described. Well, I actually have no idea what it is that Vince saw there at the pound, but I can tell you that my cousins did not see a cabot, because they do not and cannot exist. One is a feline and the other is a rodent. Apples and oranges. The science just doesn't science there. But I will leave you with a bit of cat knowledge. Now, I know this show is slowly becoming Cat Corner, but I'll be sure to tone it down for next week. But there is a breed of cat called the Manx, that's from the British Isle of Man, that does fit the description of a cabot to a T, and maybe Vince's experience even better. The Manx is an odd-shaped cat. It has a bobtail, like a rabbit, longer back legs, like a rabbit, and a rear end that's sort of humped up, like a rabbit's. And like the quote-unquote cabot that Vince saw, most Manx cats are calico, making it entirely possible that Vince stumbled upon a rare breed rather than an abomination of science. But either way, we thank you, Vince, for the entry and the opportunity to explore this urban legend a bit further.
Helps support your body's...
Burbank Boulevard, got a wreck making its way to the shoulder.
It's in the beyond that you can hear stories like Alyssa's out of New Hampshire.
Hi, Derek. This is Alyssa. I'm from New Hampshire, and I just heard one of the calls from the children's episode from Raymond. I used to live in Raymond, and I had a lot of spooky coincidences there of shadow people following me around, but that's not what I'm calling about today. Today I'm calling about when I spent my time in Danville, New Hampshire. I had moved in with my boyfriend at the time, and we were out late night because he was in college and I would drive him to and from college. A couple of nights we came home and it was fine, but there was one night I remember very distinctly. It was around 9:30 at night. We had just gotten home and I was driving my truck when I got out of the truck, and all I could smell was the smell of rotting meat. And it didn't sound right, and I felt pure terror in those moments until he told me to run. And I couldn't see what was running after us, but I could definitely feel that something was running after us, and it wasn't the normal wildlife, because we get a lot of coyotes and possibly bears, deer, all in that area. It was none of those. But a couple years later, then I was around 20, I was in Danville, different house. I was at a friend's house. We were having a bonfire. It was around, I want to say, 10 o'clock at night. So it was dark out. I couldn't see much because all we had was the fire lighting up and maybe the back porch light. I felt dread in that moment, and I look at my friends and I see the look on their faces. They felt it too. And I asked them, hey, is there something going on around here, like something with the neighbors, trying to chalk it up to something that's normal? They said no, all the neighbors are very friendly, very kind people. Until I look over and I see a white figure for a split second. I look away before I could see anything more, and I told them we need to get inside right now because I had a bad feeling about it, whether it was an intruder or a cryptid. I did not like the feeling I got from it. And so we went inside, and I can continue to feel it, and I look out the window, and I see the figure again. It was almost like a humanoid figure. It didn't settle right because it was completely white and looked almost like it had animalistic behavior, so I didn't like that. If there's any way you can explain this, I would very much appreciate it, because every time I go back into Danville, I get the feeling of being watched. Thank you for your time. I love listening to your podcast, and I hope to hear more spooky stories.
Thank you, Alyssa, for calling in. I'll tell you what, that sounds an awful lot like Andrew's story that opened tonight's program. And this experience took place only about 150 miles from the location of Andrew's strange encounter. I feel like that's nothing for a subterranean, pale humanoid creature. And I say subterranean because these all remind me of the pale crawlers that we talk so much about. And those creatures are long thought to reside somewhere underground. But I'm afraid outside of that, I don't have many answers for you, Alyssa. But you now at least have a name to go off of. Most folks in northern Appalachia tend to call these things the pale crawlers, because they tend to crawl on all fours, and because, well, obviously they're pale. I think they nailed it. So I'd start your search for answers there, Alyssa. And thank you again for calling in. Hello, Monster Squad. I thought I would see you guys here. I'm so happy to have you with me here this evening. And I have a gruesome collection of calls for you here tonight. And a New Hampshire pale crawler is just the tip of the iceberg. But first, do you remember the train story from season 17, episode 4? Aiden's call from the Texas area. He and his friends were riding the rails when they heard a wailing sound coming from one of the train cars, only to realize nothing was inside. Well, in my commentary for that story, I asked if anyone that worked the railroad might know what that sound would be, and lucky us, I got a bite. The following call was submitted anonymously, but just might explain what happened to Aiden and his friends that evening.
Hello, Derek. I'm going to remain anonymous for this call, but I worked in heavy repair quite some time, and I wanted to call in response to season 17, episode 4 about the train hopper. The sound that he heard could have very well been the seal in the brake lines that go from train car to train car. Sometimes in a curve or something, that seal can get pinched just a little bit and leak air, and it makes a very strange kind of high to mid-pitch tone that sounds about like the women screaming sound, or bobcat, or injured animal. It just depends on how much pressure's in the line. Also, the cylinder that applies the brakes to the wheel has two large rubber diaphragm cups, and sometimes dust gets up in there and causes air to leak by. That sound it's strange, it's eerie the first time you hear it, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly where the sound is, just the frequency of the sound. So that could have been a possible cause.
Thank you, caller. It sounds logical to me. I searched around a bit for a recording of that particular mechanical issue, but to no one's surprise, I came up dry. It's a very specific problem that I doubt anyone has taken the time to record. But if someone were to record it happening, and they were to send the video in to me, I'll be sure to share it somewhere on the show. In the meantime, I sure hope this helps Aiden with a little bit of closure. So thank you again, mystery caller, for filling us in. Now, folks, next up we venture down to Florida, where Jared is waiting with his entry.
Hey Derek, this is Jared. I currently live in Florida, but this incident actually happened in a small town called Elburn in Illinois. It's about an hour west of Chicago. It's a small farm town, nothing but cornfields and wooded areas. And this happened probably around 2015. It was my junior year of high school. And I've always been very interested in the supernatural, and so is my brother and our best friend. His name was Brandon. We got a Ouija board that we had messed around with a few times, had never really gotten anything out of it. But we had then had the idea to try this Ouija board at the abandoned house that was a little bit outside of town. And, you go down a gravel road in between a couple of cornfields into the woods, and then it's kind of just there. So all of the doors and the windows were locked. However, the cellar, which was an outdoor cellar that had one of those, I guess, folding wooden doors that open up from the outside. You had to get to the basement from the outside. We go down into this basement and we do the Ouija board. Now, I have asked my brother and I have asked my friend multiple times over the years if they did anything to move the board themselves. I know that I didn't, and if any of us actually did, it was subconscious, because nobody admits to actually moving it. And we made contact with a spirit called Doug. That was what he said his name was. And we actually talked to him on multiple occasions. This was, I think, the third or fourth time we had talked to him over a couple of months. This is just the most prominent story that I remember. We spoke to him for a while, and we got his name and a couple of random letters. I don't remember exactly what they were. This was probably from 9 o'clock at night to 11 o'clock at night was this session. And throughout this session, he continuously told us to dig him up and that he was buried in the basement of this house. We're like, yeah, okay, whatever this is. Like, I kept thinking that my brother was moving it or my friend was moving it. Nobody would admit to that. And he directed us to a corner of the basement, which was the only part of the basement that was a dirt floor. The rest of it was either cement or wood. But this part was what I think was some sort of storage pantry, because there were a lot of jars in there on shelves, but the floor was dirt, and he said that he was buried in this part of the floor. We didn't dig him up. We didn't attempt to. We were 16. I don't want to get into that. If there is a body there, then I got to tell the police station that we found this out through a Ouija board. That wasn't something that I wanted to get involved in, but he kept telling us to dig him up. We talked to him for a little while longer, kept telling him, no, we're not going to do this. And eventually it was time that we needed to get home, so we said, we're going to leave now, and it kept saying, no, you're not going to leave, like, don't leave, stay. And we're like, well, we got to go, we got to get home, it's a school night, blah, 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 blah. And we pack everything up, go back up to the car, and my car, it was a reliable car. It was a 2004 Nissan. Like, I had never had a single issue with it whatsoever. And when I tried to turn the car over and start it, it was like someone had taken the battery out of it. It wasn't, just cranking and not starting. It was like there was no power whatsoever. The lights wouldn't turn on. It wouldn't go into accessory mode. It wouldn't turn over. It wouldn't do anything. It was just dead, completely and 100%. So we're like, well, what do we do? Should we call my mom, have them come out and try and jump the car? And eventually we're like, well, Doug told us we couldn't leave. Maybe this is him. Maybe we need to talk to him again. We get the board back out and play it in the car, and like, all right, well, we're not leaving. What did you need to say to us? And it spelled out the word deer, not like a letterhead, like D-E-E-R, the animal deer. And it didn't say anything after that. We're like, okay, can we go now? And it moved over to yes. And the car turned right over, started up, and we left, which that in itself was, sending shivers down my spine. It was crazy. It was one of the weirdest things I've ever experienced. But on the drive home, no less, I remember specifically counting 17 deer over the course of my 7 to 10 minute drive back to my house, jumped in front of my car. There was almost 4 or 5 times that it sent me into a ditch. Now, the part of Illinois that this happened in, like I said, was a very rural area, so it wasn't uncommon for deer to jump in front of my car. But I would have, maybe one deer on my drive home from work or school or wherever it was every 2 or 3 weeks. So the way that it happened and the way that it kind of lined up with what the board had said, it's not something I've ever been able to explain. I've always been a very big believer in the supernatural and in, life after death as far as spirits and entities, but it was just a very strange thing altogether. Thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for the podcast. It's awesome. I listen to every episode, so keep it up, and I hope to hear this on a future episode. Thanks. Bye.
It's been a spell since we last played a good Ouija board story. So thank you, Jared, for calling in. Of all the names for a ghost, it had to be Doug. Now, nothing against the name Doug. It's just not ghostly. It's kind of like a Bigfoot named Todd, or a vampire named Bill. The two just don't seem to go together. Now, aside from all that, it's a pretty amazing claim Jared has here. And of course, it's entirely possible one of the other two boys was responsible and simply either never fessed up or completely forgot that they were responsible to begin with. But I like to pretend Doug is out there on the other side, just waiting to make contact again. Time to move over, Zozo, because Doug is in the building. Thank you again, Jared, for calling in.
Having said all of that,
There, which you could tell.
Now, for this next entry, we venture back to New England, where Carrie in Vermont is here with a story.
Hi, Derek. My name's Carrie. I'm calling from southern Vermont. A longtime listener, love the show. So this just happened. I was on my way home from work tonight. It was about 11:45 at night. I actually debated the whole ride home if I should call this in, but I thought it was interesting enough. I was just on the outskirts of Westover, Vermont, so not really around any businesses. It's late. There's no other cars on the road. And all of a sudden, a bunch of water hit my windshield, almost like it rained for a split second. Kind of caught me off guard. Wasn't really sure what was happening, so I threw my windshield wiper blades on, and of course it is all frozen. I guess I was just a little bit confused because it's 15 degrees outside, no overhanging trees or no cars around me, no buildings around me. And as far as I know, it should have not rained on my windshield in those temperatures. Now, I don't know if there's some sort of scientific explanation that I'm just not familiar with. I know there's things like super cold water that, once they're made unstable, they freeze instantly. You'd think the friction of the air would have made it freeze before it hit my windshield. I still actually have 2 drops on my windshield where you can see where it splattered when it hit before it froze. So I don't know, maybe glitch in the matrix, maybe something that I'm just not familiar with or don't understand. I thought it was strange, figured I'd call it in since it just happened. Again, longtime listener, love the show. Thank you so much and look forward to hearing your input.
Thanks, Carrie. Well, my input here is this. As strange and unusual as this experience was, it pales in comparison to what took place in Kentucky back in 1876.
It was a Friday morning, March 3rd, 1876. Mrs. Ellen Crouch, who was outside of her house at the time, and sometimes it's said that her grandson Alan was with her. They were outside making soap. They started to first notice things that looked like large snowflakes falling out of the sky. And once they started to hear them hit the ground, they hit with what she identified as a cracking sound. And as they looked at them, they realized that it was meat. The Kentucky meat shower is a phenomenon that was never completely solved, but it rained meat, or meat fell out of the sky for a period of about 7 minutes in Olympia Springs.
Now that clip on behalf of Kentucky Educational Television. And like I said, Carrie, it could have been a lot worse. But that's not to take away from your strange experience. That was obviously very weird. But outside of possible airplane coolant leaking or fluid from or off of a bird, I'm not real sure what this could have been. But I am glad, Carrie, that you decided to report it here. Thank you again for sharing. Okay, I have one more entry to share with you this evening. A creepy little number from the Hollywood Hills. Willem, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going, Monsters Among Us? This is Willem. I am born and raised in Los Angeles, California. And the story I'm going to tell takes place in the house that I pretty much grew up in since I was 8 years old in the Hollywood Hills. And still to this day live there. And there are many stories of the paranormal that surround my house from growing up till still to this day. But I kind of want to tell the story of where it all started, which was when I was about 14 years old. I'm 30 now, and this is 2018, so y'all do the math. But I'm about 14 years old, and my mom was pretty cool. She was a pretty cool mom as far as moms go. And so she would let my girlfriend sleep over at the time. And remember, I'm 14, so I guess that's kind of weird and special. But my girlfriend named Mika at the time, she was staying over, and we had just pretty much gone to sleep. And I had a lamp above my bed that had a fan. And I was a lazy teenager, so I connected a string and made it long enough so that I could sit up in bed and just pull the string and turn out the light for the night, instead of having to get up and go to the wall light switch. Now, strangely enough, attached to this string, I had a mini stuffed animal of a camel, and I had kind of tied its neck almost as if it was being hung by this string. So I could just, in the middle of the night, if I needed to use the restroom, I could just lift my hand up and feel the camel and pull the string and turn the light on, and so forth. So we had just gone to bed, Mika and I, and maybe 5 minutes had gone by, and it's pitch black in there. And I, just pulled the light switch off, and we're laying in bed, and all of a sudden we hear the lamp move, maybe shake back and forth a little bit. Immediately, Mika grabs me, and I'm trying to be a cool, manly man boyfriend, and I'm trying to calm her down. So I'm like, it's okay, don't worry, I'll turn on the lights, like, don't worry. And I go to lift up my hand to reach for the hanging camel that I'm supposed to pull for this light to come on, and the camel is nowhere to be found. I'm reaching around with my hand, and I can't find it anywhere. And so I give up, and I say, I'm just going to go to the wall and turn on the light switch. So I get up, I go to the wall, I turn on the light switch, and when I flick on the lights, to both of our amazement, both of our mouths just dropped to the floor. The string had been tied around the fan as if something with a good enough force had come in and whacked this camel enough to where the string had tied itself around the fan completely. It wasn't dangling at all. It was completely tied to the fan. I tried at the time to think of any logical explanation. My whole life I've been into the paranormal, but still consider myself a pretty strong skeptic, because just like a lot of other people, you think maybe these things are possible, but they'll never happen to you. And I tried to think of anything, and ridiculous things come to my mind, like maybe a big moth hit it, or maybe there's a bird in the room, or a bat, or I had no idea. But maybe something had flown into this camel and hit it, and it had spun around the fan, but we couldn't find anything, and there was really no explanation for it. We kind of tried to just calm down and left the lights on for a little bit until we eventually moseyed on back to sleep, which was kind of a surprise. But years later, in that same room, in that same house, I had broken up with that girl and was dating a different girl at the time. And she had claimed to me that she was a bit of a clairvoyant or a bit psychic, and had talked to ghosts, or a ghost, when she was a little kid. And I kind of brushed it off as maybe she's just crazy, whatever. But what was interesting is that in that room, I'd never seen anything. I'd never really felt anything other than maybe just being spooked out in the dark, maybe because of that fan story. But she said that she saw an apparition at the end of my bed and tried desperately to wake me up, but I just didn't care, and I do sleep like a rock when I can get sleep. And she said that it was a 1950s looking guy, his hair kind of gelled back, slick, the type of pants, kind of around his waist, higher, how they used to wear them, a belt, maybe a wife beater type white tank top shirt on, and that he would be snapping his fingers as if listening to a jazz song, and slowly turn around and look at her and just smile. And then she said that he would just disappear. and she'd try waking me up and never work, and she said she saw him a few times. Well, I love the podcast. I love how everybody says that you're reminiscent of Art Bell and that they've been listening to it for the past few weeks, because it's exactly what I've been doing, and it's exactly what I thought. Thank you so much for doing this podcast for everybody. It's brilliant. Cheers.
Well, I don't know about all that, Willem, but thank you for calling in. The Hollywood Hills are their very own kind of spooky. There's a ton of history up there in those winding mountains. And for those unfamiliar, essentially it's a maze of narrow one-way streets crisscrossing up and down the Santa Monica Mountains, where multi-million-dollar home after multi-million-dollar home sits. It almost reminds one of Europe, the Mediterranean, I suppose. Now the homes there are beautiful, the views are amazing, and it's much, much quieter up there, for the most part, among the coyotes and the mountain lions. And you know, Sarah and I have toyed with the idea of returning to Los Angeles proper. We live about an hour and a half from the hills as of right now, but we decided against it, at least for the time being. Mostly because I once vowed never to return to LA unless I was able to afford one of the homes up in the hills. And I try to be a man of my word. So methinks I won't be going back there anytime soon. But Pee Wee Herman's house, Paul Rubin, his Hollywood home just went up for sale for a cool $5 million. So if anyone out there is looking for a birthday gift for me, I think that's a pretty good gift. And you know, my birthday is coming up in mid-November. But I do love the area, and I love the history, and I love this story. So thank you again, Willem, for taking the time to share it here with us. And if you're looking for a roommate up there, let me know. Now, folks, that concludes the MAUB ride for this evening. Please exit the vehicle on the right-hand side. Please be sure to gather all belongings and personal items. Look twice to make sure you didn't leave anything. And if you see a fellow rider struggling with their seatbelt, be a lamb and help them out. It was a pleasure to sit down with you all here this evening. So what do you say we do it again next week? Until then, I have been your guide, Derek Hayes. This has been Monsters Among Us podcast. And this is the end of the program. Have a good night. Now, a huge thanks to all of tonight's submitters, and a big thanks to everyone tuning in here this evening. If you enjoyed the bonus content, remember you can access a butt ton of it over at Patreon. Search Monsters Among Us podcast and join the $5 level for all the goodies. Now, if you're on a budget, you can get all the main releases completely ad-free by joining that $1 level. And of course, you can check it all out for free with the 7-day free trial over there at Patreon. Now, Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Delaney Bowers. Copyright Red Crow Media. All media used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. Now be sure to follow us on social media. We have accounts at Instagram and Facebook. And jump on over to YouTube and give us a like and follow there as well. And since you're on the web messing around, leave us a rate and review wherever that sort of thing is possible. That sort of grassroots growth really helps the show. And don't forget, you can catch the show digitally every Saturday night at 11 p.m. Eastern by visiting the unexnetwork.com. And finally, tonight's score was provided by Iron Cthulhu Apocalypse, Go.ag Music, and Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Now don't forget to check out our spin-off show, Monsters Among Us Jr., especially if you have little ones that are interested in the program. Monsters Among Us Jr. drops each and every Wednesday on its own feed. Just search for Monsters Among Us Jr. in your favorite podcatcher and tune in today. Delaney and I are having a ton of fun over there. All right, folks, that's it for tonight. Keep it spooky and have yourselves a good night.